The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months after my mother's funeral. I almost threw it away with the rest of the bills and advertisements cluttering my mailbox, but something about the aged manila envelope made me pause. My name, Sarah Chen, was written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting across the front, with instructions that made my blood run cold. To be delivered only if Elena Chen does not contact you within 6 months of my death. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. The return address was from Harrison & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, folded with the same precise care my mother had always used when pressing my school uniforms. "My dearest Sarah," it began, and I could hear her voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me in my small Chicago apartment. "If you are reading this, it means I have been gone for 6 months, and Elena has not found the courage to reach out to you. There are things I should have told you years ago, secrets I kept to protect you, but now I realize my silence may have caused more harm than the truth ever could." I sank onto my couch, the letter shaking in my grip. Elena? I had never heard that name before. My mother had been my only family for 28 years. After my father died when I was 3, it had always been just the two of us against the world. "Elena is your half-sister," the letter continued. "She is 4 years older than you, and she has been searching for us since she turned 18. I made her promise to stay away, to let you have a normal life, free from the complications of our family's past. But I see now that I was wrong. You deserve to know the truth about your father, about Elena, and about the choice I made that changed all of our lives forever." The room seemed to spin around me. A half-sister? How was that possible? My mother had never mentioned any other children, any other family. I was an only child, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. Our small world had been complete, or so I thought. Before you were born, your father was married to Elena's mother, Victoria. They had Elena when they were young, barely out of college themselves. The marriage was troubled from the start, but when Elena was born, they tried to make it work. Your father, David, was a good man, Sarah. I need you to understand that. Everything he did out of love. I set the letter down, my heart pounding. My mother had always spoken of my father in reverent tones, describing him as a loving husband who had been taken too soon by a car accident. But she had never mentioned a first marriage, never hinted at another child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When Elena was 4, David and Victoria's marriage finally ended. The divorce was bitter, and Victoria moved across the country with Elena, cutting off all contact. David was devastated. He threw himself into his work, trying to forget the daughter he was no longer allowed to see. That's when I met him. I picked up the letter again, my mother's words painting a picture I had never imagined. My parents' love. Story had always seemed so pure, so simple. High school sweethearts who found each other again after college, married young and had me. But this revealed something much more complicated. We fell in love quickly, perhaps too quickly. David was still healing from the loss of Elena, and I was young and naive enough to believe that love could conquer any pain. We married within a year, and you were born 2 years later. For the first 3 years of your life, we were happy. David had found peace, and I thought our family was complete. The letter paused there, and I could see where my mother's pen had hesitated, leaving a small ink blot on the paper. Whatever came next had been difficult for her to write. Then Elena started looking for us. She was 18, curious about the father she barely remembered. Victoria had remarried and moved several times, but Elena was determined. She hired a private investigator and found our address. The first letter arrived on your third birthday. I tried to imagine my third birthday party, the one I had seen in dozens of photographs. My mother and father smiling, me blowing out candles, on a homemade cake, our small apartment decorated with streamers. Had my father been distracted that day? Had he been thinking about another daughter, one he hadn't seen in over 14 years? David was overjoyed. He wanted to contact Elena immediately, to bring her into our lives. But I was terrified, Sarah. I was young and selfish, and I couldn't bear the thought of sharing him with another child. Elena represented a past I wanted him to forget, a reminder that I wasn't his first choice, that our family wasn't as perfect as I had convinced myself. It was. The admission hit me like a physical blow. My mother, who had always seemed so selfless, so devoted to our small family, had been jealous of a teenage girl she had never met. I convinced David to wait, to think about what Elena's presence would mean for our family. I told him that introducing another child would confuse you, that it would disrupt the stability we had worked so hard to create. I was persuasive, Sarah. I made him believe that choosing Elena meant choosing his past over his present, over us. My hands were shaking again. I could see where this was heading, and I wasn't sure I wanted to read the rest. Elena kept writing. Letter after letter, each one more desperate than the last. She wanted to know her father, to understand where she came from. David would read each letter multiple times, his face filled with longing and regret. But every time he mentioned responding, I would remind him of what it might cost us. I was convinced that Elena would destroy our perfect little world. I thought about my mother's behavior in the months before my father's death. I had been too young to understand the tension, but now I could remember the hushed conversations. That stopped when I entered the room, the way my mother would quickly hide certain pieces of mail. The night before the accident, David and I had our worst fight ever. Elena had sent graduation pictures, and David broke down crying. He said he had missed too much, that he needed to be part of her life. He had already written a letter to her, inviting her to visit us. I found it on his desk and destroyed it while he was sleeping. My breath caught in my throat. My mother had destroyed a letter from my father to his daughter. The woman who had raised me to value honesty and family above all else had deliberately kept a family apart? David was furious when he discovered what I had done. He said he was going to call Elena that morning, that he was tired of hiding from his past. We argued until dawn, and he left for work without saying goodbye. That was the last time I saw him alive. The car accident, the phone call that had shattered our world when I was 3 years old. Now it carried a different weight, a terrible, what if that would haunt me forever? After David died, Elena attended the funeral. She stood in the back, and I pretended not to notice her. She was beautiful, Sarah, with David's eyes and his determined chin. She looked exactly like you do now. After the service, she approached me. She wasn't angry or accusatory. She just wanted to know about her father, to understand who he had been in the years they were apart. I tried to imagine that scene. My mother, grieving and guilty, facing the daughter her husband had died trying to reach. A young woman who had lost her father twice, first to divorce and then to death. I should have embraced her, should have recognized that she was your sister and David's daughter. Instead, I panicked. I told her that David hadn't wanted to see her, that he had moved on with his new family. I lied to her, Sarah, and I watched her heart break all over again. She left without saying another word. The cruelty of it took my breath away. My mother, in her grief and guilt, had chosen to inflict the same pain on Elena that she herself was feeling. Elena tried to contact me several times over the years. She sent birthday cards for you, Christmas presents, letters asking about your milestones. She never asked for money or anything for herself. She just wanted to be part of your life, to be the sister she should have been allowed to be. But I returned everything unopened. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that you were better off without the complications of an extended family. I thought about all the birthday parties where I had been the only child, all the Christmases that had felt somehow incomplete despite my mother's efforts to make them magical. Had Elena been thinking of me on those days? Had she wondered what I looked like, what I was interested in, whether I ever thought about the family I didn't know I had? As you grew older, I realized my mistake. I watched you struggle with feeling alone in the world, with wondering about your father's family. You used to ask me if you had any aunts or uncles, any cousins to play with. I would tell you that we were enough, that family was what you made it. But I was lying to you, just as I had lied to Elena. The letter's tone shifted, becoming more urgent, more desperate. 3 years ago, Elena found me again. She had become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children find their families. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She had married and had 2 children of her own, twin boys who would be your nephews. She showed me pictures, and Sarah, they looked just like you did at that age. Nephews. I had nephews I had never met, a sister I had never known existed, an entire family that had been kept from me by the woman I had trusted most in the world. Elena asked me one simple question. Don't you think Sarah deserves to know? She has a sister? I couldn't answer her. I had spent so many years justifying my choices, convincing myself that I had done what was best for you. But looking at her, seeing the woman she had become despite everything I had put her through, I knew I had been wrong about everything. The letter was nearing its end, and I could see where my mother's handwriting had become less steady, more emotional. I made Elena promise to give me time to tell you the truth myself. She agreed, but she also made me promise that if something happened to me, if I died before I found the courage to explain, she would be allowed to contact you. This letter is my insurance policy, my way of ensuring that my cowardice doesn't cost you the family you deserve. I could picture my mother writing these words, probably in the hospital during one of her final stays, knowing that her time was running out, and that she was running out of chances to make things right. Elena lives in Portland now. She's a social worker for the state, specializing in family reunification. She has been waiting for 25 years to meet her sister. Her address is enclosed, along with her phone number. I don't know if she will forgive me for what I've done, but I hope she will give you the chance to know each other. The letter concluded with an address and phone number written in my mother's careful script, along with a final paragraph that brought tears to my eyes. Sarah, I know this changes everything you thought you knew about our family, about me. I hope you can forgive me for the lies, for the choices I made out of fear and selfishness. Elena is a remarkable woman, and she has been waiting her entire life to be your sister. Don't let my mistakes cost you any more time with the family you should have had all along. I love you both more than you will ever know. Mom. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in my hands. My entire understanding of my life, my family, my mother's motivations had been shattered in the space of a few minutes. The woman who had raised me, who had been my hero and my constant companion, had been harboring a secret that had cost me a lifetime of relationships. But alongside the anger and confusion, there was something else. Hope. Somewhere in Portland, there was a woman named Elena who had been waiting 25 years to meet me. A woman who had my father's eyes and chin, who had spent her life helping families reunite, who had twin boys who looked like me. I walked to my computer and opened a new browser window. Elena Chen, Portland, Oregon, social worker. The search results populated immediately. There she was, listed on the state website as a senior family reunification specialist. The professional photo showed a woman who looked remarkably like me, with the same dark hair and serious eyes. Below her name was a bio that made my heart skip. Elena Chen has dedicated her career to helping children find their biological families. Having experienced family separation herself, she brings a unique perspective to her work with the state's most challenging cases. She specializes in cases involving long-term separations and complex family dynamics. I stared at the screen, trying to process that this woman, this stranger who shared my name and my face, had turned her pain into purpose. While I had been living my life completely unaware of her existence, she had been working to reunite other families, knowing that her own was incomplete. My phone sat on the coffee table beside me, Elena's number written clearly on the letter. It would be simple to call her, to bridge the gap that had existed for 25 years with a single phone call. But I found myself paralyzed by the magnitude of what that call would mean. What do you say to a sister you've never met? How do you apologize for a lifetime of silence that wasn't your fault? How do you explain that you've just learned about her existence, that the mother who raised you had been lying to both of you for decades? I looked at the clock. It was 3 p.m. in Chicago, which meant it was 1 p.m. in Portland. Elena would probably be at work, helping other families navigate the complicated process of reunification. The irony was overwhelming. Instead of calling, I found myself researching everything I could about Elena Chen. Her LinkedIn profile showed a career dedicated to social work, with specializations in trauma counseling and family therapy. She had graduated from Portland State University with a master's degree in social work and had been with the state for over 15 years. There were photos from work events, community gatherings, charity functions. In each one, Elena looked confident and compassionate, surrounded by colleagues and the families she had helped reunite. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness that I recognized from my own mirror. The look of someone who understood loss, who had experienced separation, firsthand. I found a local newspaper article from 2 years ago, featuring Elena's work with a particularly challenging case. A teenager who had been separated from his siblings during a custody battle had been reunited with his family after Elena spent months tracking down relatives across multiple states. The article quoted Elena saying, "Family is the most important thing we have. No child should have to grow up wondering where they belong." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Elena had been speaking from experience, from her own childhood of wondering about the father she barely remembered and the sister she had never been allowed to meet. I found social media profiles, though Elena seemed to keep them fairly private. There were photos of her twin boys, who did indeed look remarkably like me at that age. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, ordinary moments that should have included me. A lifetime of memories that I had missed, a family I had never known existed. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself torn between anger and grief. Anger at my mother for the lies, for the choices she had made that had cost me a relationship with my sister, but also grief for all the time we had lost, for the childhood we should have shared, for the support we could have given each other through the difficult years. I thought about my father, dying with the knowledge that he had failed to reconnect with his eldest daughter. Had he thought about Elena in his final moments? Had he regretted listening to my mother's fears instead of following his heart? The letter had mentioned that Elena had attended my father's funeral, that she had stood in the back while I, a 3-year-old who barely understood what was happening, had been shielded from the complexity of adult grief and family dynamics. She had been there, wanting to mourn the father she had lost twice, and my mother had turned her away. By evening, I had made my decision. I couldn't call Elena cold, couldn't simply dial her number and announce myself as the sister she had been waiting to meet. This deserved more thought, more care. I needed to write her a letter, to explain what I had learned and how I was feeling. I needed to give her the chance to decide how she wanted to handle this reunion. I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper, trying to find the words to bridge a 25-year gap. How do you introduce yourself to a sister you've never met? How do you explain that you've just learned about her existence, that everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? "Dear Elena," I began, then stopped. It felt too formal, too distant for someone who should have been part of my life all along. "Dear sister, I tried instead, but that felt presumptuous. I didn't know if she still wanted to be my sister after all these years, after the pain my mother had caused her. Finally, I settled on simply, Elena. I don't know how to begin this letter, or even if I have the right to write it. 6 months ago, our mother died, and I buried her thinking I was the only family she had left. Today I received a letter that has changed everything I thought I knew about my life, about our family, about the choices that were made before I was old enough to understand them. I paused, looking out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in Portland, Elena was probably just finishing her workday, helping other families navigate the complexities of reunion and reconciliation. Did she think about me? Did she wonder if I knew about her, if I would ever reach out? I learned about you today, Elena. I learned that I have a sister who has been waiting 25 years to meet me, who has been thinking about me on birthdays and holidays while I remained completely unaware of her existence. I learned that our father died trying to reconnect with you, and that our mother's fear and jealousy cost us both a lifetime of sisterhood. The words flowed more easily now, years of questions and confusion finally finding their voice. I don't know how to apologize for something that wasn't my fault, but I feel like I need to try. I'm sorry that you've had to wait so long to meet me. I'm sorry that our mother's choices kept us apart. I'm sorry that you had to grow up wondering about the father you barely remembered, and that you had to mourn him twice, once when you were separated, and again when he died. I thought about what Elena's life must have been like, growing up with the knowledge that she had a father and sister she wasn't allowed to see. The confusion, the rejection, the constant wondering about what she had done wrong to deserve such treatment. I want you to know that if I had known about you, if I had been given the choice, I would have wanted to know you. I would have wanted to be your sister, to share holidays and birthdays and all the ordinary moments that make up a family. I grew up feeling like something was missing, like our small family was incomplete in some way I couldn't understand. Now I know why. The letter was becoming longer than I had intended, but I couldn't seem to stop. There were 25 years of thoughts and feelings to express, a lifetime of conversations that had never happened. I've spent the afternoon learning about you, about the work you do, about the family you've built. I'm proud to share your name, Elena. I'm proud that my sister has dedicated her life to helping other families find each other, even when her own family was kept apart by secrets and lies. You turned your pain into purpose, and that takes a strength I'm not sure I would have had. I wrote about my life, about growing up as an only child, about the career I had built in graphic design, about the relationships that had never quite filled the void I couldn't name. I wrote about my mother's final years, about the guilt I now felt for not recognizing the sadness in her eyes when she spoke about the past. I don't know what happens next, Elena. I don't know if you still want to meet me after all these years, or if the pain of our mother's choices has made it too difficult to consider a relationship now, but I want you to know that I'm here, that I've been here all along, even when I didn't know you were waiting. As I finished the letter, I realized that this was just the beginning. Whether Elena chose to respond or not, I had taken the first step toward understanding my family's complicated history. I had acknowledged the sister I had never known, and the pain that had shaped both of our lives. I sealed the letter in an envelope, addressing it to Elena Chen in Portland, Oregon. Tomorrow, I would mail it, and then I would wait. Just as Elena had been waiting for 25 years, wondering if the sister she had never met would ever want to know her. But as I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of family, the hope that I wasn't as alone in the world as I had always believed. Somewhere in Portland, there was a woman who shared my name, my father's eyes, and a lifetime of questions about the family we should have been. The letter would bridge the gap between us, carrying with it the hope that it wasn't too late to become the sisters we had always been meant to be. 3 days passed before I found the courage to mail the letter. I rewrote it twice, second-guessing every word, every sentiment. How do you distill 25 years of unknowing into a few pages? How do you reach across a chasm created by someone else's choices and ask for forgiveness for sins you didn't commit? On Friday morning, I walked to the post office 6 blocks from my apartment, the sealed envelope weighing heavy in my purse. The postal worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took the letter without ceremony, unaware that she was handling the bridge between 2 lives that had been kept apart for decades. "Regular mail to Portland takes about 5 days," she said, stamping the envelope. 5 days for my words to travel across the country to Elena. 5 days before she would learn that the sister she had waited for had finally discovered her existence. Returned to my apartment and tried to resume normal life. But everything felt different now. My morning routine of coffee and emails seemed hollow when I knew that somewhere in Portland, Elena was going about her day, helping other families reunite while still waiting for her own reunion. My freelance graphic design projects, usually engaging challenges that could occupy my mind for hours, felt trivial compared to the magnitude of what I had learned. That weekend, I drove to my mother's house for the first time since her funeral. The small ranch home in suburban Naperville sat exactly as she had left it, preserved in the amber of grief and practicality. I had been putting off the task of sorting through her belongings, overwhelmed by the finality of disposing of a lifetime's worth of possessions. Now, I had a different purpose. The house smelled like her lavender sachets and the faint residue of her morning tea ritual. Family photographs lined the mantel and hallway walls, chronicling our small family's milestones. But now I looked at them with new eyes, searching for clues I had missed, signs of the secret she had carried for so long. In her bedroom, I found what I was looking for. Hidden in the back of her jewelry box, beneath the costume pearls and vintage brooches she had collected over the years, was a manila folder thick with papers. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing Elena's attempts to reach us over the decades. The first item was a graduation announcement from 1998. Elena Marie Chen, Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, Portland State University, summa cum laude. There was a photo attached, a young woman in cap and gown, smiling proudly at the camera. Her resemblance to me was startling. We had the same determined jawline, the same thoughtful eyes. This should have been sent to family members, should have been celebrated and displayed with pride. Instead, it had been hidden away like a shameful secret. Beneath that were birthday cards, dozens of them, spanning 20 years. Each one addressed to me, each one returned unopened. The earliest ones were simple children's cards with cartoon characters and age-appropriate messages. As the years progressed, they became more mature, more thoughtful. The card for my 16th birthday contained a longer message that I could see through the envelope's transparent window. Dear Sarah, I wonder if you like to drive yet, if you're thinking about college. I hope you know that someone out there is thinking of you on your special day. The weight of those unsent sentiments, those one-sided conversations across the years, was crushing. Elena had been marking my milestones, celebrating my existence from afar, while I had no idea she was out there thinking of me. There were Christmas presents, too, still wrapped, with gift tags in Elena's careful handwriting. Books, mostly. Novels appropriate for whatever age I would have been, biographies of inspiring women, art books that showed she had somehow learned about my interest in design. Each gift represented research, thought, care. Elena had been studying me from a distance, trying to know the sister she wasn't allowed to meet. But the most devastating discovery was a thick stack of letters, all addressed to my mother, all attempting to maintain some connection to our family. The earliest were from when Elena was 18, shortly after she had started looking for us. Her handwriting was younger then, more hopeful. Dear Mrs. Chen, one began, I know this is difficult and I don't want to cause any problems for your family. I just want Sarah to know that she has a sister who loves her, even from far away. I'm not asking to disrupt your lives. I just hope that someday, when she's older, she might want to meet me. The letters continued through the years, documenting Elena's life milestones, her graduation from college, her first job as a social worker, her engagement to a man named Marcus, who she described as understanding about her complicated family situation. She shared these moments with my mother, hoping that somehow they would be passed along to me. I got married last month, read a letter from 5 years ago. Marcus is wonderful, and he understands why finding my family is so important to me. We're thinking about starting a family of our own soon, and I keep imagining how wonderful it would be if my children could know their Aunt Sarah. The word aunt hit me like a physical blow. I could have been an aunt for years now. There were children out there who were my nephews, who carried my father's genes and my family's legacy, and I had missed their entire lives so far. The most recent letter was from just 2 years ago, and its tone was different. More mature, more resigned, but also more direct. Mrs. Chen, I'm writing to you one last time. I've been trying to reach you and Sarah for over 20 years now, and I'm starting to accept that you may never want us to be part of each other's lives. I want you to know that I understand your position, even if I don't agree with it. But I also want you to know that if anything ever happens to you, if Sarah is ever alone in the world, I'm here. She has a sister who has been waiting her whole life to love her. The prophetic nature of those words was chilling. Elena had somehow known that my mother's protectiveness would eventually leave me isolated, had tried to offer herself as a safety net for a future she couldn't have foreseen, but had somehow anticipated. At the bottom of the folder was something that made me gasp audibly. It was a copy of my father's final letter to Elena, the one my mother had destroyed. She must have made a copy before burning the original, keeping it as evidence of her betrayal, or perhaps as a reminder of the choice she had made. My dearest, Elena, it read in my father's handwriting, which I recognized from old birthday cards and love notes to my mother that she had kept. I am so sorry for all the years we've lost, for all the birthdays and milestones I've missed. I've thought about you every single day since your mother took you away, and I've let fear and other people's concerns keep me from reaching out to you. But I can't live with that anymore. The letter went on to describe his life since the divorce, his marriage to my mother, my birth. But what struck me most was the tone, not the words of a man who had moved on and started over, but of a father who had never stopped mourning the loss of his first child. I want you to meet your sister Sarah. She's 3 years old now, and she has your curiosity, your determination. I see so much of you in her, and I think you would love each other. I know this is complicated, and I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after all these years of silence. But I'm hoping we can find a way to be a family again, all of us together. The letter ended with plans for Elena to visit, suggestions for how they might slowly integrate her into our family life, dreams of birthday parties where she would be present, holidays where our small family would expand to include the daughter and sister we had been missing all along. My mother had destroyed this letter, had chosen her own insecurity over my father's desire to reunite with his eldest child. She had robbed all of us, Elena of her father, me of my sister, and my father of the chance to heal the wound that had been festering for years. I sat on my mother's bedroom floor, surrounded by the evidence of her deception, and wept. I cried. For Elena, waiting decades for a family that seemed to reject her at every turn. I cried for my father, dying with the weight of unfinished business and unrequited paternal love. I cried for my mother, whose fear and jealousy had cost her the chance to have a larger, more complete family. And I cried for myself, for all the years I had spent feeling incomplete without understanding why. But as the tears subsided, something else emerged: determination. My mother's choices had created this separation, but I had the power to end it. Elena was still out there, still waiting. It wasn't too late to become the family we should have been all along. I gathered all of Elena's letters and cards, all the evidence of her persistent love and hope. These belonged with me now, were part of the story I needed to understand. But I left copies in my mother's house, in the folder where she had hidden them. Future visitors to this house, whoever might eventually buy it or clear it out, would find evidence of a woman's complicated choices and the family she had kept apart. As I locked up the house and drove back to Chicago, I felt lighter somehow. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. I was no longer carrying the weight of unknown history, no longer wondering why our family had felt incomplete. The missing piece had a name, an address, and 25 years of patient hope on D. Monday morning, exactly 1 week after receiving my mother's letter, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Portland area code and my heart stopped. I let it ring twice, 3 times, before finding the courage to answer. Hello? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Is this Sarah Chen? The voice on the other end was warm, slightly nervous, unmistakably similar to my own. Yes, I managed. This is Elena, your sister Elena. The words hung between us across the miles, carrying the weight of 25 years of separation and the promise of connection. I had imagined this conversation dozens of times since mailing my letter, but now that it was happening, I found myself speechless. I got your letter, she continued when I didn't respond immediately. I've read it about 50 times since Friday. I can't believe you didn't know about me. All these years, I thought you and your mother were choosing not to respond to my letters. I never knew, I said, finding my voice. I never knew any of it. The letters, the cards, the fact that you existed. My mother never told me anything. I figured that out from your letter, Elena said gently. And I want you to know, I'm not angry with you, Sarah. I never was. I was hurt by what I thought was rejection, but I always hoped that someday you might want to meet me. I do, I said. Quickly, perhaps too quickly. I want to meet you. I want to know you. I want to understand everything that happened, everything we missed. There was a pause, and I could hear Elena's breath catch slightly. Really? Even after learning about all the complicated history, all the pain our parents caused each other, especially because of that, I replied. We both lost out on having a sister because of choices other people made. But we're adults now. We can choose for ourselves. I've been hoping to hear you say that for 25 years, Elena said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. Sarah, I've thought about you every birthday, every holiday. I've wondered what you looked like, what you were interested in, whether you ever thought about having siblings. I did think about it, I admitted. I always felt like something was missing, like our family was incomplete somehow. Now I know why. We talked for over an hour that first conversation, sharing the basic facts of our lives, filling in the broad strokes of 25 years of separate existence. Elena told me about her work as a social worker, about her husband Marcus and their twin boys, about the house they had bought in Portland's suburbs. I told her about my career in graphic design, about my life in Chicago, about the strange loneliness I had never been able to explain. What are your boys' names? I asked, still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that I was an aunt. David and Daniel, she said. David is named after our father. I wanted to honor his memory, even though we never got to reconcile. The fact that Elena had named her son after the father who had been kept from her, the father she had mourned, twice, spoke to a generosity of spirit that amazed me. Despite everything, she had chosen love over bitterness, hope over resentment. How old are they? I asked. 7, she said. They're in 2nd grade now. They know about you, Sarah. I've told them about their aunt in Chicago, about how I've been hoping to meet you someday. They've been asking when they can meet you too. The idea that these children, my nephews, knew about me when I had only just learned of their existence was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Elena had been preparing them for a reunion she wasn't sure would ever happen, keeping my memory alive in their minds, just as she had kept theirs alive in mine through her unsent letters. "I want to meet them," I said. "I want to meet all of you." "We want to meet you too," Elena replied. "But Sarah, I want you to know that there's no pressure here. I know this is overwhelming, learning about all of us at once. We can take this as slowly as you need to." Her consideration, her willingness to let me set the pace after she had been the one waiting for decades, was exactly what I needed to hear. This woman, my sister, had spent her life helping families navigate complicated reunions. She understood better than anyone how delicate this process could be. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with my certainty, "I don't want to take it slowly. I feel like we've waited long enough. Would it be crazy if I came to Portland? Maybe next weekend?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long, enough that I began to worry I had pushed too hard, too fast. But when Elena spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "It wouldn't be crazy at all," she said. "It would be perfect." As we made plans for my visit, discussing flights and logistics and the 100 small details of arranging a reunion 25 years in the making, I felt something shift inside me. The loneliness that had been my constant companion, the sense of incompleteness that had shadowed my entire life, was beginning to lift. I had a sister. I had nephews. I had a family I had never known was waiting for me. The conversation ended with promises to call again soon, with Elena sending me photos of the boys and their father, with my commitment to book a flight to Portland for the following weekend. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small apartment with new eyes. This was still my space, my sanctuary, my carefully constructed life. But it was no longer the entirety of my world. Somewhere in Portland, there was a woman who shared my face and my father's memory, who had spent her life helping other families reunite while waiting for her own reunion. There were 2 little boys who had been asking when they could meet their Aunt Sarah, not knowing that their Aunt Sarah had only just learned they existed. The letter from my mother had shattered my understanding of my family. But Elena's phone call had begun the process of rebuilding it into something larger, more complex, and infinitely more complete than what I had lost. I had spent 28 years as an only child, believing I was alone in the world except for my mother. Now I was about to become part of something bigger, part of the family I should have had all along. The plane ticket to Portland would be booked within the hour, carrying me toward a reunion that had been 25 years in the making, and a sister who had never stopped believing that someday we would find our way back to each other. The flight to Portland felt both endless and too short. I spent the 3-hour journey alternating between excitement and terror, my stomach churning with anticipation. What if we didn't connect in person? What if 25 years of separation had created too wide a gulf to bridge? What if the sister I had imagined from our phone conversations didn't match the reality of who Elena actually was? I had packed and repacked my suitcase 3 times, unsure what one brings to meet a sister for the first time. I settled on casual clothes and a few photos from my childhood, thinking Elena might want to see what I had looked like during all those years she had been sending unopened birthday cards. The Portland airport was busy with Friday afternoon travelers, but I spotted Elena immediately. She was standing near the security exit, holding a sign with my name, and the resemblance was even more striking in person than it had been in the photos I had found online. We had the same build, the same way of standing with one hip cocked slightly, the same nervous habit of tucking hair behind our ears. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the crowded terminal. 25 years of separation, decades of wondering and waiting had led to this moment. Then Elena smiled, the same lopsided grin I saw in my own mirror every morning, and I knew everything was going to be okay. "Sarah?" she said, though there was no question in her voice. She knew me as immediately as I had known her. Elena. I dropped my carry-on bag and crossed the space between us in 3 quick steps. She opened her arms, and I walked into a hug that felt like coming home. We held each other for a long time, both of us crying, both of us laughing, both of us trying to process the surreal reality of finally meeting. Other travelers moved around us, but we existed in our own bubble of reunion and recognition. "You're real," Elena whispered into my hair. "You're actually here." "So are you," I replied, pulling back to look at her face. "My sister. My actual sister." Elena wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I was so nervous about meeting you. I kept thinking, what if she doesn't like me? What if we have nothing in common? What if 25 years is too much time to make up for? What if, I said, echoing her words with a smile. We could spend forever wondering about what ifs. Or we could just be here now, together." She laughed, a sound that was startlingly familiar. "Marcus is always telling me I overthink everything. I guess some things don't change, even when you're meeting your sister for the first time." "Marcus is your husband?" I asked as we headed toward baggage claim. "For 8 years now," Elena said, her face softening. "He's been incredibly patient with my family situation. He's the one who encouraged me to keep trying to reach you, even when I wanted to give up. He said that love doesn't have an expiration date, and that someday you might be ready to meet me." He sounds like a wise man. He is. And he's excited to meet you. We all are. The drive from the airport to Elena's house took us through Portland's suburbs, past tree-lined streets and well-maintained neighborhoods. Elena kept glancing at me as she drove, as if she couldn't quite believe I was really there. "This is so strange," she said, stopped at a red light. "I've imagined this moment so many times over the years. What we would say to each other, how it would feel. But the reality is so much better than anything I had pictured." "What did you picture?" I asked. "Honestly? I thought you might be angry. I thought you might blame me for disrupting your life, for bringing up painful family history. I thought you might see me as a reminder of everything that went wrong between our parents." I considered this as we turned into a residential neighborhood. "I was angry," I admitted, "but not at you. At my mother, for keeping us apart. At the situation, for being so complicated. At myself, for not somehow knowing you were out there." "You couldn't have known," Elena said firmly. "Your mother made sure of that." Elena's house was a modest 2-story colonial with a well-maintained garden and children's toys scattered across the front yard. As we pulled into the driveway, the front door opened and 2 identical boys burst out, followed by a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples. "Aunt Sarah!" the boys shouted in unison, running toward the car. I looked at Elena in surprise. "They're excited to meet me." "They've been counting down the days since I told them you were coming," she said. "I hope that's okay. I know it's a lot, meeting everyone at once." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. The boys reached the car as I was getting out, both of them talking at once, their words tumbling over each other in their excitement. "Are you really our aunt?" asked one of them. "Do you live in a really tall building in Chicago?" asked the other. "Mom says you make pictures. For work, is that true? Can you teach us how to draw?" Elena laughed, ruffling both boys' hair. "David, Daniel, give Aunt Sarah a chance to breathe. She just got off an airplane." David and Daniel, even their names sounded right together, a matched set like their identical faces and matching excitement. They both had Elena's dark hair and my father's determined chin, but their eyes were clearly from their father's side of the family. Marcus approached more slowly, giving me space to process the overwhelming reunion. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus. Elena's told me so much about you over the years." "All good things, I hope," I said, shaking his hand. "All hopeful things," he replied. She's been looking forward to this day since before I met her. The house was warm and lived in, with family photos covering the refrigerator and children's artwork displayed on the walls. It felt like the kind of home I had always imagined having someday, but had never quite managed to create for myself. "Are you hungry?" Elena asked, leading me into the kitchen. "I made dinner, but I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made a little of everything." The kitchen table was set for 5, with a place card at one spot that read Aunt Sarah in a child's careful handwriting. The boys had clearly been involved in the preparation for my visit, and the thought of them discussing their mysterious aunt, wondering what I would be like, made my heart swell. "This is beautiful," I said, gesturing to the yacht. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble." "It's not trouble," Elena said. "We've been wanting to have you over for dinner for 25 years. Dinner was a revelation. The boys peppered me with questions about Chicago, about my work, about whether I had any pets. I didn't, but I promised to consider getting a dog, so they would have someone to play with when they visited. Elena and Marcus shared stories about their life in Portland, about the boys' soccer games and school projects, about the community they had built together. "Mom," David said during dessert, "can we show Aunt Sarah our room now?" "After we help clean up," Elena replied automatically, then caught herself. "Actually, you know what? Yes. Go show your aunt your room. The dishes can wait." The boys' bedroom was a typical 7-year-old's paradise, with bunk beds, action figures, and books scattered everywhere. But what caught my attention was a small shelf near the window that held a few special items: a photo of Elena and Marcus on their wedding day, a rock painted with a rainbow that Daniel had made in art class, and a small framed picture of my father. "That's Grandpa David," Daniel said, noticing my gaze. "Mom says he was really nice and that he would have loved to meet us." "He would have," I said, picking up the photo. It was one I had seen before, from my father's college days. "He would have been so proud of both of you. Mom says you knew him better than she did," David said. "Can you tell us about him?" For the next hour, I shared stories about my father that I had never told anyone. I told them about his terrible jokes and his love of old movies, about how he used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings and let me help by cracking the eggs. I told them about his gentleness, his patience, his way of making ordinary moments feel special. Elena appeared in the doorway as I was finishing a story about my father teaching me to ride a bike. She was leaning against the doorframe, tears in her eyes. "I never knew any of that," she said quietly. "All those little details about who he was as a person, as a father." "I have more stories," I said. "Lots more. And I brought photos." After the boys were tucked into bed, Elena, Marcus, and I sat in the living room with coffee and the photo albums I had brought from Chicago. I showed them pictures of my father throughout my childhood, shared memories of family vacations and quiet moments at home. "He looks happy," Elena said, studying a photo of my father at my 5th birthday party. "I always wondered if he was happy, if he ever thought about me." "He thought about you constantly," I said. "I found his letter, Elena. The one my mother destroyed. He never stopped loving you, never stopped wanting you to be part of our family." Elena's face crumpled, and Marcus moved to put his arm around her. "I've wondered about that for so long," she whispered. "Whether he cared, whether he ever regretted losing me." "He regretted it every day," I said. "And he died trying to fix it." We talked until well past midnight, sharing stories and filling in the gaps of our separate lives. I learned that Elena had become a social worker specifically because of her own experience with family separation, that she had dedicated her career to helping other families avoid the pain she had experienced. "The irony isn't lost on me," she said. "I spend my days reuniting families while my own family was broken apart." "But you fixed it," I said. "You never gave up trying to reach us. If you hadn't kept sending those letters, If you hadn't made my mother promise to contact you, we never would have found each other." "I almost did give up," Elena admitted. "About 5 years ago, after your mother returned another letter unopened, I thought about stopping. Marcus talked me out of it." "What did he say?" Marcus smiled. "I told her that some things are worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes, and that love doesn't have an expiration date." The guest room Elena had prepared for me was decorated with fresh flowers and a small basket of toiletries. On the nightstand was a framed photo of the 4 of them at the beach, along with a note that read, "Welcome home, Sarah. Love, your family." I lay awake for a long time that first night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the day's events. 24 hours earlier, I had been alone in Chicago, still reeling from the discovery of Elena's existence. Now I was sleeping in my sister's house, having met my nephews, having been welcomed into a family that had been waiting for me to come home. The next morning, I woke to the sound of children's laughter and the smell of pancakes. I found Elena in the kitchen, standing at the stove with her hair in a messy bun, looking exactly like I did when I cooked breakfast for myself. "Good morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I hope you slept okay. The boys wanted to wake you up at 6 to play soccer, but I told them you might need to recover from traveling." "I slept great," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. The sleep had been fitful, filled with dreams about my father and my mother and all the years of separation we had endured. "Coffee?" Elena asked, and I nodded gratefully. The boys appeared at the kitchen table, already dressed and ready for the day's adventures. They had apparently made a list of things they wanted to show me in Portland, starting with their school playground and ending with the ice cream shop where Elena took them for special occasions. "Can Aunt Sarah come to my soccer game next week?" David asked. "She lives in Chicago, buddy," Elena said gently. "That's pretty far away." "But she could move here," Daniel suggested. "Then she could come to all our games." I looked at Elena, wondering how she handled these kinds of questions from her sons. How do you explain to 7-year-olds that adult life is complicated, that families don't always live in the same place, that sometimes love has to stretch across thousands of miles? "We'll see," Elena said diplomatically. "For now, let's just enjoy having her here to visit." But as the day unfolded, as we visited the boys' school and their favorite park, as we had lunch at a family restaurant where Elena and Marcus were clearly regulars, I found myself thinking about Daniel's suggestion. What if I did move to Portland? What if I started over in a city where I had family, where I could be part of my nephews' lives, where I could build a relationship with the sister I had just found? That evening, after the boys were in bed, Elena and I sat on her back porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, her voice hesitant. "Anything." "What was it like, growing up with her? With our mother?" I considered the question carefully. "It was complicated," I said finally. "She was a good mother in many ways. She was devoted to me, worked hard to provide for us, always made sure I knew I was loved. But now I realize she was also terrified of losing me. Terrified that if I knew the truth about our family, I might choose you over her." "That's so sad," Elena said. "She could have had both of us. We could have been a real family." I think she knew that, deep down. I think that's why she kept all your letters, why she made that promise to you before she died. She knew she had made the wrong choice, but she didn't know how to fix it. "Do you forgive her?" Elena asked. "I'm trying to," I said. "I'm angry about all the time we lost, all the years we could have been sisters. But I also understand that she was acting out of fear, out of a desire to protect what she saw as her family. She was wrong, but she wasn't malicious." "I forgive her," Elena said quietly. "I've had to, for my own peace of mind. Holding on to anger would have poisoned my life, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be the kind of person who could love you. When we finally met, not someone who was bitter about the past." "You are," I said. You are exactly the kind of person who can love without conditions, who can forgive without resentment. I think that's why you're so good at your job, why you can help other families heal. I hope so, Elena said. I hope something good has come from all this pain. Look around you, I said, gesturing to her house, her family, the life she had built. Something beautiful has come from it. You turned your pain into purpose, your loss into a way of helping others. And now we have this chance to be sisters, to build a relationship that nobody can take away from us. Elena smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I never thought I'd have a sister, she said. I mean, I always knew you existed, but I never thought I'd get to actually know you, to have you be part of my life. Well, now you do, I said, and I'm not going anywhere. We have 25 years to make up for. Starting with tomorrow, Elena said, I've taken the whole week off work. I want to show you everything. The places I love, the people who matter to me. I want you to understand who I am, how I got here. I'd like that, I said. And Elena, thank you. For what? For never giving up on us, for keeping the door open all these years, even when it seemed like it would never be opened from the other side, for waiting for me. You're my sister, Elena said simply. That's what sisters do. They wait for each other. As we sat together on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky, I thought about how much my life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, I had been alone in the world except for memories of my deceased mother. Now, I was part of something bigger, something that had been waiting for me all along. The next morning would bring new adventures, new stories to share, new memories to create. But for now, it was enough to sit with my sister, to feel the presence of family, to know that I was finally home. The week in Portland passed like a beautiful dream that I didn't want to wake up from. Elena had planned each day carefully, introducing me to different aspects of her life and the city she had made her home. We visited her workplace, where her colleagues greeted me with knowing smiles. Apparently, she had talked about her sister from Chicago for years, even when the rest of us didn't know I existed. Elena's told us so much about you, said her supervisor, Maria, a woman in her 50s with laugh lines around her eyes. She's been hoping for this reunion longer than I've known her. At the Department of Human Services building where Elena worked, I watched her interact with families going through their own complicated reunification processes. She moved through the corridors with quiet authority, stopping to check on cases, offering encouragement to social workers dealing with difficult situations, always with a gentle word or a patient ear. This is where the magic happens, Elena said, showing me into her office. The walls were covered with thank you cards from families she had helped reunite, dozens of them, each one representing a success story, a family made whole again. One card caught my attention. It showed a crayon drawing of stick figures holding hands under a rainbow with, "Thank you for bringing our family back together," written in a child's unsteady handwriting. That's from the Hendersons, Elena explained, noticing my focus. 3 kids separated in foster care for 2 years before we managed to place them with their grandmother. It took 18 months of paperwork and court hearings, but they're together now. You must see so much pain in this job, I said. I do, Elena admitted. But I also see so much hope. Every family I help reunite reminds me that love finds a way, even when the system seems designed to keep people apart. It's why I keep doing this work, even when it's heartbreaking. I thought about Elena choosing this career, dedicating her life to healing the kinds of wounds she had experienced firsthand. While I had channeled my creative energy into graphic design, she had turned her pain into a mission to prevent other families from enduring what ours had. That afternoon, Elena took me to visit our father's grave. I had been to the cemetery many times over the years, but always alone, always carrying the weight of being his only surviving child. Now, walking through the gates with Elena beside me, I felt something shift. The headstone was simple. David Michael Chen, beloved father and husband. But now I understood that the story it told was incomplete. He had been beloved by more people than just my mother and me. He had been mourned by a daughter he hadn't seen in years, a daughter who had named her own son after him to keep his memory alive. Elena knelt beside the grave and placed a small bouquet of wildflowers near the headstone. "I've never been here. Before?" she said quietly. "I always wondered where he was buried, but I didn't know how to find out without contacting your mother." "He would be so happy to know you're here," I said, kneeling beside her. "He would be so proud of who you've become, of the work you do." "I wish I could tell him about the boys," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. "I wish he could have met his grandsons." "Maybe he knows," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Maybe he knows that his daughters finally found each other. We sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts about the father we had shared, and lost in different ways. When we finally stood to leave, Elena linked her arm through mine. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "I've been wanting to visit him for 25 years. "Thank you for being here with me," I replied. I never knew how lonely it was, coming here by myself. That evening, Elena suggested we video call with some of our extended family, relatives on our father's side that I had never known existed. Apparently, Elena had connected with them years ago during her search for information about our father. Auntie. "Ruth is Dad's youngest sister," Elena explained as she dialed. "She lives in San Francisco now, but she remembers you when you were little. She's been asking about you ever since I found her." The video call connected, revealing a woman in her 60s with our father's eyes and a warm smile. "Sarah!" she exclaimed immediately. "Oh my goodness, you look just like your father did at your age." "Aunt Ruth," I said, the title feeling foreign, but right on my tongue. I can't believe I have an aunt I never knew about. "Your mother was very protective of your privacy," Ruth said diplomatically. "But Elena and I have been hoping this day would come for years. I have so many photos of your father growing up, so many stories I'd love to share with you." The call expanded to include 2 of our father's cousins and their children, an entire branch of the family tree that had been invisible to me my whole life. They all knew Elena, had been following her life and career from a distance, and had been wondering about me for decades. "We always hoped we'd get to meet you," said our cousin Jennifer, who was close to my age. "Elna would update us on what she could find out about you, your college graduation, your career. We felt like we knew you, even though we'd never met." It was overwhelming to discover that I had been the subject of conversation at family gatherings I didn't know existed, that there were people out there who had been keeping track of my life and hoping to meet me someday. After the call ended, Elena and I sat in her living room surrounded by family photos she had collected over the years. Pictures of relatives I was just now learning about, family reunions I had never attended, a whole network of connections that had been waiting for me to join. "This is a lot to process," I said, looking through a photo album of a family reunion from 5 years earlier. Elena was there with Marcus and the boys, surrounded by aunts and uncles and cousins, all of them looking relaxed and happy together. "I know it is," Elena said. "But Sarah, they all want to know you. They've been waiting for this opportunity just like I have." "Why didn't anyone ever try to contact me directly?" I asked. Elena sighed. "Because your mother made it clear that she didn't want you to know about Dad's family. She told Ruth that she was protecting you from complications, that she wanted you to have a simple, stable life. And honestly, everyone respected her wishes, even if they didn't agree with them. So you all knew about each other, but I was the missing piece." "You were never missing to us," Elena said firmly. "You were always part of the family, even when you couldn't be present. Your name came up at every family gathering, every major holiday. We all wondered what you were like, how you were doing, whether you were happy." That night, I called my best friend Jessica back in Chicago to try to process everything I was learning. Jessica had been my closest friend since college, and she knew me well enough to understand how overwhelming this all was. "So let me get this straight," Jessica said after I had given her a condensed version of the week's revelations. "You have a sister, 2 nephews, an aunt, and about a dozen cousins you never knew existed?" "That's just the beginning," I said. "There's a whole family culture I've been missing out on. Annual reunions, holiday traditions, shared memories going back decades. It's like discovering there's been this parallel universe running alongside my life the entire time." "How do you feel about it?" Jessica asked. "Grateful," I said immediately. "And also sad about all the time we've lost. But mostly grateful. These are good people, Jess. They're kind and welcoming, and they've been hoping to know me for years. And Elena? Elena is—" I paused, trying to find the right words. "She's exactly the sister I would have chosen if I had been able to choose. She's thoughtful and generous, and she's built this beautiful life despite everything she went through. I admire her so much." "Are you thinking about moving to Portland?" Jessica asked, with the intuition of a longtime friend. "Maybe," I admitted. "I know it sounds crazy, uprooting my entire life for people I just met. But they're not really people I just met, are they? They're my family. And I've never felt like I belonged somewhere the way I feel like I belong here." "What about your work, your apartment, your life in Chicago?" These were practical questions that I had been trying not to think about. My freelance graphic design. Business was portable in theory, but most of my clients were in Chicago. My apartment lease had 8 months left on it. My entire social circle, small as it was based in Chicago. But as I looked around Elena's guest room, at the family photos on the nightstand, and the welcome note she had written, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was somewhere that felt like home. The next day, Elena took me to meet her mother-in-law, Marcus's mother Helen, who had apparently been following my story with great interest. "Elena's been talking about you for years," Helen said, embracing me warmly. "I've been so hoping you two would find each other." "You knew about me too?" I asked. "Of course I did. Elena's never made a secret of having a sister she was trying to reach. It's been one of her greatest hopes, meeting you." Helen served us lunch in her sunny kitchen while sharing stories about Elena and Marcus's courtship, their wedding, the early days of their marriage when Elena was still sending letters to my mother. "Elena used to get so discouraged when those letters came back unopened," Helen said. "But Marcus would always remind her that sometimes the best things are worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes." "He seems like a wonderful husband," I said. "He is," Helen agreed. "And he's been looking forward to having a sister-in-law almost as much as Elena has. He grew up with 3 sisters, so he understands how important these relationships can be." That afternoon, Elena and I took the boys to their soccer practice, where I met the other parents in their community. It struck me how easily I fit into this suburban family routine, how natural it felt to cheer from the sidelines alongside Elena, to help carry equipment back to the car, to discuss plans for post-practice ice cream. "Aunt Sarah, did you see my goal?" David asked, running up to us after practice, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "I saw it," I said, giving him a high five. "That was amazing." "Are you going to come to my next game?" Daniel asked hopefully. "I'm going back to Chicago tomorrow," I said gently, and watched his face fall. "But you'll come back, right?" David pressed. "You'll come back soon?" I looked at Elena, who was watching the interaction with a careful expression. We hadn't talked about future visits, about how this long-distance relationship between sisters would work. "I hope so," I said. "I'd like to come back very soon." That evening, on my last night in Portland, Elena and I stayed up late talking about the future. The boys were asleep. Marcus was in his office working on some end-of-week tasks, and we had the living room to ourselves. "I don't want to pressure you," Elena said carefully. But I have to ask, how do you see this working, going forward? I mean, I'm so grateful we've had this week together, but I don't want it to be a one-time thing. Neither do I said. Elena, this week has been the happiest I've been in years. Maybe ever. Being here with you and your family, it feels like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm thinking about moving here, I said, the words coming out in a rush. I know it sounds impulsive, and maybe it is, but I've never felt like I belonged somewhere the way I feel like I belong here. Elena's face lit up. Really? You'd really consider moving to Portland? I've been thinking about it all week, I admitted. My work is mostly freelance anyway, so I could do it from anywhere. And I don't have any family tying me to Chicago anymore. But here, I have you and Marcus and the boys, and all these relatives I'm just getting to know. The boys would be over the moon, Elena said. They've been asking me every day if you're going to live here now. What do you think? Honestly? Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Honestly, I think it would be wonderful. But I also think you should take time to really think about it, to make sure you're not making a decision based on the emotion of this week. This is a big change, Sarah. I don't want you to do something you might regret. What if I don't regret it? I asked. What if this is exactly what I'm supposed to do? Then I think you should follow your heart, Elena said. But maybe start with longer visits? Come back in a month for a week, see how it feels when the novelty wears off a little? It was good advice, the kind of thoughtful counsel I was already learning to expect from my sister. Elena approached everything with careful consideration, weighing options and consequences before making decisions. It was a trait that had served her well in her career and her personal life. There's something else, I said. I want to do something about Mom's house. I've been putting off dealing with it, but after finding all those letters, all that evidence of what she kept from us, I think it's time. What are you thinking? I want to sell it and split the proceeds with you, I said. I know Mom left everything, to me in her will, but that was before I knew about you. Half of that house should be yours. Half of everything she left should be yours. Elena shook her head immediately. Sarah, no. I don't want your mother's money. I don't need it. And it would feel wrong to me. It's not her money, I said firmly. It's our father's legacy, too. He would have wanted both of his daughters to benefit from what he and Mom built together. But she raised you. She took care of you for 28 years. Whatever she left you, you earned through all those years of being her daughter. And you earned it through all those years of being his daughter, even when you couldn't be with him, I countered. Elena, please, let me do this. Let me make this one thing right. We talked about it for another hour, Elena reluctant to accept. Anything that felt like charity, me insistent that this was about justice and family legacy. Finally, we reached a compromise. We would use half the proceeds from the house sale to establish a scholarship fund in our father's name, something that would help other young people pursue education or career training. That feels right, Elena said when we settled on the plan. Dad would like knowing that something positive came from all the pain our family went through. As I packed my suitcase that night, preparing to return to Chicago the next morning, I felt like I was leaving home. Rather than going home, the week in Portland had shown me what life could be like with family, with connections, with the kind of belonging I had never experienced before. The flight back to Chicago was somber, filled with thoughts about the decision I was facing. By the time I landed at O'Hare, I had made up my mind. I was going to start the process of relocating to Portland, of building a life near the family I had just discovered. The first step would be returning to Portland in a month, as Elena had suggested. But this time, I would come with a different purpose. Not just to visit my sister, but to explore the possibility of making Portland my permanent home. As I unlocked the door to my Chicago apartment, the space felt smaller and emptier than it had before I left. The silence that had once felt peaceful now felt lonely. The independence I had prized now felt like isolation. I had spent 28 years building a life as an only child, believing that self-sufficiency was the highest virtue. But now I understood what I had been missing: the comfort of knowing that someone shares your history, your genes, your understanding of where you come from, the joy of being an aunt, of watching children grow who carry your family's legacy forward. The decision was made. I was going to move to Portland, to be near Elena and her family, to build relationships with the extended family I was just beginning to know. It would mean starting over in many ways, but it would also mean starting over with the foundation of family support I had never had before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be alone, and that made all the difference in the world. Back in Chicago, the process of unraveling a life proved more complex than I had anticipated. What had seemed like a clear decision in Portland became tangled in the practical realities of leases and clients and the hundreds of small connections that tie a person to a place. My landlord, Mr. Kowalski, was surprisingly understanding when I explained that I needed to break my lease early due to family circumstances. "Family is everything," he said in his thick Polish accent, waving away my offer to pay the penalty fee. "You go to your sister. The apartment? It will find someone else." My clients were another matter. I had built my freelance graphic design business over 6 years, cultivating relationships with local restaurants, small businesses, and a few larger corporations. The thought of explaining to each of them that I was moving across the country felt overwhelming. "You could keep some of them," suggested my friend Jessica over dinner at our usual spot downtown. "With video calls and email, you could work with Chicago clients from Portland." "Maybe," I said, picking at my salad. "But it feels like I should make a clean break. Start fresh in Portland. Build something new there. Or maybe you're overthinking." "This," Jessica said gently. "Sarah, you found your sister 3 weeks ago. You spent 1 week with her. Don't you think you might be rushing into a major life change?" It was a fair question, one that had been nagging at me since I returned to Chicago. Was I making a rational decision based on genuine family connection? Or was I running away from the loneliness that had been my constant companion for 28 years? "I've been thinking about that," I admitted. "But Jess, I've never felt like I belonged somewhere the way I felt like I belonged in Portland. Not just with Elena, but with her whole family, her community. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one, you know?" Jessica nodded, understanding. She had 3 siblings and a large extended family, and she had often expressed sympathy for my only child status. "I get it," she said. "But promise me you'll give yourself time to be sure. Moving across the country is a big deal." "I promised Elena I'd come back in a month to test the waters," I said. "Maybe I'll have a clearer perspective after that visit." But even as I said it, I was already mentally planning the move. I had started researching Portland neighborhoods, looking at rental properties online, investigating the local design community. In quiet moments, I found myself imagining Sunday dinners with Elena's family, helping the boys with homework, being present for their school plays and soccer games. 2 weeks after returning from Portland, I received an unexpected phone call from Aunt Ruth in San Francisco. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice warm but slightly hesitant. "I hope you don't mind me calling. Elena gave me your number, and I wanted to follow up on our video call." "Of course, Aunt Ruth. It's good to hear from you. I've been thinking about our conversation, about how you're considering moving to Portland to be closer to Elena. I think it's wonderful, but I also wanted to offer you another option." I settled into my couch, curious about what she might suggest. Getting older, Sarah, and this big house in San Francisco is really too much for me. I've been thinking about selling it and moving somewhere smaller. Maybe Portland, actually. Would you consider coming here for a while?" You could stay with me, get to know this side of the family, and still be close enough to visit Elena regularly. The offer was generous and unexpected. Aunt Ruth was essentially offering me a place to land while I figured out my next steps, a chance to be near family without the pressure of making a permanent commitment to Portland. That's incredibly kind of you, I said. But I don't want to impose on your life. You wouldn't be imposing, Ruth said firmly. I've been alone in this house for 5 years since your uncle passed away. Having family around would be a blessing, not a burden. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. But Sarah, there's something else. I have boxes of photos and documents from your father's childhood, things your grandmother saved. I'd love to share them with you, help you understand where you come from. After hanging up with Aunt Ruth, I realized that my decision to move west wasn't just about Elena anymore. It was about connecting with an entire family history I had been denied, about understanding my father's life before my mother entered it, about claiming my place in a larger story. The following week, I flew back to Portland as planned. This time, I approached the visit differently. Instead of staying with Elena, I rented a small apartment for the week, wanting to experience what daily life in Portland might actually be like. Are you sure you don't want to stay with us? Elena asked when I picked up the rental car at the airport. I want to, but I think I need to try living here on my own terms, I explained. See how it feels when I'm not in vacation mode. Elena nodded, understanding. That's smart, but you're still coming for dinner tonight, right? The boys have been counting down the days. The rental apartment was in a neighborhood called Hawthorne, known for its quirky shops and coffee culture. It was smaller than my Chicago place, but had character. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, large windows that let in the Pacific Northwest's filtered sunlight. That first evening, I walked to Elena's house for dinner, a 20-minute stroll, through tree-lined streets. The boys greeted me at the door with the same enthusiasm they had shown 3 weeks earlier. But there was something different in their demeanor, a casual familiarity that hadn't been there before. Aunt Sarah, look what I made in art class, Daniel said, pulling me by the hand to the refrigerator where a new drawing was displayed prominently. It was a picture of stick figures under a rainbow, but when I looked closer, I realized there were 5 figures instead of the usual 4. That's you, Daniel explained, pointing to the 5th figure. I told my teacher about my aunt who lives in Chicago but might move here. The casual way he said it, as if my potential move was a fact rather than a possibility, struck me. These children had already made room for me in their lives, had already started imagining a future where I was a constant presence rather than an occasional visitor. Mrs. Peterson wants to meet you, David chimed in. She's my teacher, and I told her all about you. What did you tell her? I asked, genuinely curious. That you're Mom's sister who she looked for her whole life, and that you make pictures for work, and that you're going to live here so you can come to our soccer games. Again, that casual certainty. To these 7-year-olds, my moving to Portland wasn't a question but a given. Their confidence was both touching and terrifying. Over dinner, I shared Aunt Ruth's offer with Elena and Marcus. Elena's face lit up immediately. San Francisco is only a 10-hour drive from here, she said. We could visit each other easily, and Ruth is wonderful. She's been like a second mother to me since I found Dad's family. You think I should consider it? I asked. I think you should consider all your options, Marcus said diplomatically. This is a big decision, and there's no rush to make it. But privately, I could see the appeal of Aunt Ruth's offer. It would give me time to transition slowly, to build relationships with the extended family while still maintaining independence, and it would put me close enough to Elena to be a real part of her family's life without the pressure of starting completely over in a new city. The rest of the week in Portland was revelatory. I worked from the rental apartment, maintaining my Chicago client relationships while exploring what professional opportunities might exist in Portland. I visited coffee shops and art galleries, attended a networking event for local designers, and even had an informal interview with a marketing firm that was looking for freelance talent. "We're always looking for good designers," said the creative director, a woman named Samantha who had moved to Portland from New York 5 years earlier. "The creative community here is really supportive of newcomers." "What made you decide to move here?" I asked. "Family," she said simply. "My sister lives here, and I wanted to be closer to her kids. Best decision I ever made." I spent afternoons with Elena and the boys, falling into routines that felt natural and comfortable, picking them up from school, helping with homework, attending David's soccer practice. Elena had to work late one evening, and I stayed with the boys, making dinner and overseeing bath time as if I had been doing it for years. "Will you read us a story?" Daniel asked as I tucked them into their beds. "Which one would you like?" I asked, scanning their bookshelf. "The one about the family that finds each other," David said. I looked at the book he pointed to, a children's story about separated siblings who find their way back to each other. It was clearly a favorite, judging by the worn cover and dog-eared pages. As I read the story, I realized that Elena had been preparing her boys for my arrival long before I knew they existed. She had been telling them stories about family, about love that transcends distance and time, about the possibility that someday their aunt might come home. "That's like you and Mom," Daniel said sleepily as I finished the story. "Yes," I agreed. "It's exactly like me and Mom." On my last night in Portland, Elena and I sat on her back porch again, this time with a more serious conversation ahead of us. "So," she said, settling into her chair with a cup of tea, "how did it feel this week, being here on your own terms? It felt right," I said honestly. "More right than anything has felt in a long time. But I keep wondering if I'm making this decision for the right reasons." "What do you mean? Am I moving west because I genuinely want to be part of this family? Or because I'm running away from being alone?" I asked. "Am I trying to fix something that can't be fixed by changing geography?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering my question. "I think those might be the same thing," she said finally. "Sarah, you've been alone your whole life, even when you didn't know you had family out here. Now you know you have options. You can choose to be part of something bigger than yourself." "What if I'm not good at it?" I asked. "What if I don't know how to be a sister, an aunt, part of a family?" "Then you'll learn," Elena said simply. "We'll figure it out together. That's what families do." I told her about Aunt Ruth's offer, about the possibility of moving to San Francisco as a stepping stone to being closer to everyone. "I think that's a great idea," Elena said immediately. "Ruth would love having you there, and it would give you time to transition slowly. Plus, the boys and I could come visit you in San Francisco. They've never been there. You'd be okay with that? With me not moving directly to Portland? Sarah, I've been waiting 25 years to have you in my life. A few more months or even years while you find your footing isn't going to make any difference. What matters is that you're choosing to be part of this family, whatever that looks like." That night, I called Aunt Ruth from my rental apartment. "I'd like to take you up on your offer," I said. "If you're still serious about having me come stay with you." "Oh, Sarah," Ruth's voice was full of joy. "I'm absolutely serious. When were you thinking of coming?" "Maybe in 2 months? I need to wrap up some things in Chicago first." "That's perfect. It will give me time to prepare the guest room and to organize all those photos I told you about." After hanging up with Aunt Ruth, I called Elena to let her know about my decision. "I'm so happy," she said. "And Sarah, I'm proud of you. This takes courage, leaving everything familiar to build something new." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," Elena said. "That means it matters to you. The best decisions are always a little scary." Flying back to Chicago this time felt different. Instead of the melancholy I had experienced after my first visit to Portland, I felt energized, purposeful. I had a plan now, a path forward that honored both my need for independence and my desire for family connection. The next 2 months passed in a blur of activity. I gave notice to my landlord, sold most of my furniture, and carefully selected which possessions were worth shipping across the country. I had difficult conversations with clients, explaining that I was relocating but would be available for remote work. Some understood, others didn't. But I found that I cared less about business relationships that couldn't weather a geographic change. Jessica threw me a goodbye party at our favorite restaurant, inviting the small circle of friends I had cultivated over the years in Chicago. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to people who had been my chosen family in the absence of biological family. "Promise you'll visit," Jessica said, hugging me tight. "Promise you'll come see me in San Francisco." I replied, "I'll have a guest room and you can meet all my new family." "Your new family," she repeated with a smile. I love how that sounds. The night before I left Chicago, I drove to my mother's house one last time. The realtor had already listed it, and there were showings scheduled for the following week. Soon, strangers would walk through the rooms where I had grown up, where my mother had kept her secrets, where the evidence of our family's complicated history had been hidden for decades. I stood in the kitchen where my mother had made countless meals, where she had helped me with homework, where she had probably read Elena's letters before hiding them away. I tried to summon anger about her choices, but found only sadness for the fear that had driven them. "I understand now," I said aloud to the empty house. "I understand why you were scared, but I'm not scared anymore. I'm going to do what you couldn't do. I'm going to choose family, even when it's complicated." The next morning, I loaded my car with the possessions I couldn't live without and started the drive west. Elena had offered to fly to Chicago to help with the move, but I had declined. This was a journey I needed to make alone, a symbolic passage from the life I had known to the one I was choosing to build. As I crossed into Iowa, then Nebraska, then Colorado, I felt the weight of my old life falling away. The flat Midwest landscape gave way to rolling hills, then mountains, then finally the Pacific coast. By the time I reached San Francisco, I felt like a different person than the one who had discovered my mother's letter 2 months earlier. Aunt Ruth was waiting on her front porch when I pulled up to her Victorian house in the Richmond district. She was smaller than I had expected, but her embrace was warm and strong. "Welcome home, Sarah," she said, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I was. Living with Aunt Ruth felt like stepping into a warm embrace that had been waiting for me my entire life. Her Victorian house in San Francisco's Richmond district became my sanctuary, a place where every corner held stories about the family I was finally getting to know. But it was also where I would face the most challenging discovery of this entire journey. 3 weeks into my stay, Ruth suggested we tackle what she called the archive, a converted bedroom on the 3rd floor that housed decades of family documents, photos, and memorabilia that she had been curating since the 1970s. "I've been meaning to organize all of this properly," she said, opening the door to reveal floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with banker's boxes, photo albums, and filing cabinets. "But honestly, I've been waiting for the right person to help me make sense of it all." The room smelled like old paper and lavender sachets, and dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the dormer windows. This wasn't just family history. It was an archaeological dig through decades of carefully preserved memories. "Where do we start?" I asked, slightly overwhelmed by the scope of the project. "With this," Ruth said, pulling a thick manila folder from one of the filing cabinets. "These are the documents from Victoria's custody case against your father. I've kept them all these years because I thought someday Elena might want to understand what really happened." The legal papers were yellowed with age, filled with formal language that barely concealed the emotional devastation they represented. As I read through depositions and court filings, a picture emerged that was far more complex than the simple story of a father losing touch with his daughter. Victoria hadn't just taken Elena away, She had systematically worked to erase David from their daughter's life. The documents revealed a pattern of manipulation that was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a psychiatric evaluation that Victoria had requested. She claimed Dad was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous to Elena. Ruth nodded grimly. "Your father was devastated by that accusation. He voluntarily underwent psychological testing to prove he was fit to be Elena's father. But by then, Victoria had already moved to another state and changed their last name." Changed their last name? Elena wasn't always Chen? No, she was born Elena Morrison, after Victoria's maiden name. When Victoria remarried a few years later, Elena became Elena Patterson. She didn't know her real last name was Chen until she started looking for your father when she turned 18. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Elena had spent her entire childhood and adolescence not even knowing her father's name. How had she managed to find us at all? "She hired a private investigator," Ruth explained, seeing my confusion. "Gave him what little information she had. David's first name, that he had worked as an accountant in the Bay Area, that he had remarried and had another daughter. It took the investigator 3 years to trace the connection. I found more. Documents that painted an even clearer picture of Victoria's systematic campaign against my father. Letters from Elena's school requesting information about her father for a family tree project, with Victoria's responses claiming that Elena's father was deceased and not to be discussed. Medical forms where Victoria had listed David as unknown, rather than providing his contact information. "She told Elena that her father was dead?" I asked, horrified. "For most of Elena's childhood, yes," Ruth confirmed. It was only when Elena started asking more specific questions as a teenager that Victoria admitted David was alive, but claimed he had abandoned them and wanted nothing to do with his daughter. The cruelty was systematic and complete. Victoria had not only taken Elena away from David, but she had convinced Elena that her father had rejected her. No wonder Elena's early letters to my mother had been so tentative, so apologetic. She had been trying to connect with a father she believed had never wanted her. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. In a folder marked Personal Correspondence, I found copies of letters that David had written to Elena over the years. Letters that had been returned unopened with "Return to Sender" stamped across the front. "He never stopped trying," Ruth said quietly, watching me read. Through the returned letters. Every birthday, every Christmas, every major holiday. He would write to Elena at whatever address he could find, and they would always come back. The letters were heartbreaking in their consistency and hope. Year after year, my father had written to a daughter who never received his words, sharing updates about his life, expressing his love, begging for a chance to be part of Elena's world again. "My dearest Elena," read one letter from when she would have been 12. "I don't know if you remember me, but I think about you every single day. I wonder if you still love to draw like you did when you were little, if you still insist on putting ketchup on everything, if you still have that stuffed rabbit you carried everywhere." Another letter from Elena's high school graduation year. "I know you're graduating this spring, and I'm so proud of you even though I haven't been able to be part of your achievements. I've started a college fund for you, just in case you ever want to contact me. I hope you know that my door is always open, that there's nothing you could ever do that would make me stop loving you." Each letter was a time capsule of fatherly love, carefully preserved despite being rejected. My father had been documenting Elena's childhood from a distance, creating a one-sided conversation that spanned decades. Did Elena ever know about these letters? I asked. "Not until she found your father's family," Ruth said. "When she contacted me, I showed her copies of all of them. She broke down crying, realizing that her father had been trying to reach her all along. I found photographs too, pictures that David had taken or collected over the years, trying to piece together Elena's life from whatever fragments he could gather. School photos that he had somehow obtained, newspaper clippings from when Elena made the honor roll in high school, even a copy of her high school yearbook that he had purchased through some circuitous route. He was like a detective, Ruth explained, constantly searching for any information about Elena's life. When she started college, he managed to find out which school and what she was studying. He was so proud when she chose psychology, said, "It proved she had inherited his analytical mind." In another box, I discovered something that made me gasp audibly. It was a complete baby book for Elena, meticulously maintained by my father during the first 4 years of her life. Every milestone was documented: her first word, which had been Dada, her first steps, her first day of preschool. But what made it extraordinary was that David had continued updating it even after Elena was gone, filling in milestones based on assumptions and hopes. First day of kindergarten, probably September 1982, read one entry. I imagine she was nervous, but excited. She always loved meeting new people. Lost first tooth, estimated age 6, read another. I hope the tooth fairy was generous. I remember how she used to wiggle her baby teeth for weeks before they fell out. High school graduation, spring 1996. My beautiful daughter is grown up. I wish I could have been there to see her walk across the stage. The baby book was a masterpiece of faith and imagination, a father's attempt to remain connected to a daughter he wasn't allowed to see. Each entry was accompanied by photos he had managed to obtain. Drawings Elena had made during their brief years together, pressed flowers from their walks in the park. "This is incredible," I whispered, turning through pages of carefully preserved memories. He never gave up believing he would see her again. Never, Ruth confirmed. Even when the lawyers told him to move on, even when your mother suggested he focus on his new family, David held on to the hope that someday Elena would come looking for him. But the most shocking discovery was a folder labeled Private Investigation. Reports. Inside were monthly reports from a private detective that David had hired to keep track of Elena's life from a distance. He hired someone to watch her? I asked, uncertain how to feel about this revelation. Not to watch her, Ruth clarified quickly. To make sure she was safe, to gather information about her well-being. David was terrified that something might happen to Elena and he wouldn't know about it. The investigator was instructed to be completely invisible, never to approach Elena or interfere in her life in any way. The reports painted a picture of Elena's childhood and adolescence from an outsider's perspective. Subject continues to excel academically, read one report from when Elena was in middle school. Teachers describe her as thoughtful and mature for her age, has formed close friendships with several classmates, appears well-adjusted despite family instability. Another report, from Elena's senior year of high school. Subject has been accepted to 3 universities, shows strong interest in psychology and social work. Volunteer work at local animal shelter suggests empathetic nature. No signs of behavioral problems or substance abuse. The investigator had been documenting Elena's life like a benevolent guardian angel, ensuring that her father knew she was healthy, happy, and thriving. It was invasive by some standards, but it was also an act of desperate love from a father who had been cut off from his child. When did he stop having her followed? I asked. When she turned 18 and started college, Ruth said. David felt that once she was an adult, she had the right to privacy, even from him. But by then, he knew she was strong and capable, that Victoria had raised her well despite everything. The final box Ruth showed me contained something that nearly broke my heart. It was labeled For Elena and contained gifts that David had bought for his daughter over the years, birthday presents and Christmas gifts that he had never been able to give her. There were books appropriate for different ages, jewelry for milestone birthdays, a graduation gift that had never been presented. Each item was carefully wrapped and labeled with the year it was intended to be given, creating a museum of uncelebrated occasions. 16th birthday, read one tag attached. to a delicate silver bracelet. For my beautiful daughter, who I hope knows how proud I am of the young woman she's becoming. High school graduation, read another, attached to a leather-bound journal. For Elena, who has so many stories to tell and dreams to pursue. The most recent item was dated just 3 months before my father's death. It was a small velvet box containing a pair of pearl earrings with a note that read, "For Elena on her 21st birthday. These belong to your grandmother, who loved you before she ever met you, and who would be so proud of the woman you've become." He never stopped buying her gifts, Ruth said, tears in her eyes. Every major occasion, every holiday, he would imagine what she might like, what would be appropriate for her age and interests. It was his way of staying connected to her, of being her father even when he couldn't be present in her life. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of my father's unwavering love for Elena, I realized that this room contained more than just family history. It was a testament to the power of persistent love, to a father's refusal to give up on his daughter despite legal obstacles and geographical distance. "Does Elena know about all of this?" I asked. "She knows some of it," Ruth said. "I've shown her copies of the letters and some of the photos, but I've been waiting for the right time to show her the gifts, the baby book, the investigation reports. It's a lot to process, learning that your father never stopped loving you while believing that he had abandoned you. When will you tell her?" "I think that decision should be yours and Elena's together," Ruth said. "This is your family's history, now both of yours. You should decide together how to handle these revelations." That evening, I called Elena from my room overlooking the San Francisco Bay. I told her about the discoveries in Ruth's archive, about the letters and gifts and the careful documentation of her life from afar. "He was having me followed?" Elena asked, and I could hear the complex emotions in her voice. "Not followed exactly," I explained. "More like watched over. He was terrified something would happen to you and he wouldn't know. The investigator never interfered or approached you. He just made sure you were safe and doing well." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "It's creepy," she said finally. "But it's also kind of touching. All those years when I thought he didn't care about me, he was actually keeping track of my life, making sure I was okay. There's more," I said, and told her about the gifts, the baby book, the continued documentation of milestones he had missed. Elena cried as I described the carefully wrapped presents, the imagined celebrations, the hope that had sustained our father through decades of separation. "I want to see everything," she said finally. "Can I come down to San Francisco this weekend? I want to go through all of it, to understand what Dad was thinking and feeling all those years." "Of course," I said. "Ruth has been hoping you'd want to see it all. And Sarah? Thank you for being the one to find all of this. I don't think I could have handled discovering it alone." That weekend, Elena drove down from Portland with Marcus and the boys. Ruth had prepared for their visit by organizing the most significant items in the living room, creating a chronological timeline of David's attempts to stay connected to his eldest daughter. Elena moved through the display slowly, touching each item reverently. She read every letter, examined every photo, held each unopened gift as if it were made of crystal. "He never stopped being my father," she said finally, sitting surrounded by decades of evidence of paternal love. "Even when I didn't know it, even when I thought he had forgotten about me, he was still being my dad." David and Daniel, who had been playing quietly in the corner, approached their mother with shy curiosity. "What's all this stuff, Mom?" David asked. "These are things that Grandpa David saved for me," Elena explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He loved me very much, even though we couldn't be together when I was growing up. Like Aunt Sarah loved you even though she didn't know about you?" Daniel asked with 7-year-old logic. "Exactly like that," Elena said, pulling both boys into her lap. "Sometimes love has to wait a long time to be understood. but it never stops being real. As we sat in Ruth's living room that weekend, surrounded by the evidence of our father's persistent love, I realized that we had come full circle. The letter my mother had left me had revealed the existence of my sister, but it was this room full of carefully preserved hope that revealed the true depth of our father's character. He had been neither the abandoning father that Victoria had portrayed nor the man who had simply moved on that my mother had sometimes suggested. He had been something more complex and beautiful, a father who had loved both of his daughters across time and distance, who had found ways to be present even when presence was impossible. The family that had been broken apart by fear and legal maneuvering was finally understanding the truth of its own story. And in that understanding, we were becoming whole again. 6 months after discovering my mother's letter, I stood in Elena's backyard in Portland, watching my nephews play on the swing set that Marcus had built the previous summer. The David Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund had been officially established, and today we were celebrating its first recipient, a young woman who had aged out of foster care and was starting college to study social work. Aunt Sarah, push me higher. Daniel called from the swing, his laughter carrying across the yard where extended family members had gathered for our first official family reunion. Not too high, Elena warned, but she was smiling as she said it. The transformation in her face over these past months had been remarkable. The careful sadness that had shadowed her features for 25 years had been replaced by something lighter, more complete. "Sarah, come meet your cousin Michael," Ruth called from the patio where she was holding court with photo albums, showing our newly expanded family the pictures from our father's childhood that she had been preserving for decades. Michael was one of the cousins I had met through video calls but never in person. A doctor from Sacramento who had driven up for the reunion with his wife and teenage daughter. His daughter Emma was studying graphic design and had peppered me with questions about my career throughout the afternoon. "It's amazing," Michael said, shaking my hand warmly. "All these years we've been hearing about the mysterious sister Elena was trying to find, and here you are, fitting right into the family like you've always been here." "It feels like I have always been here," I replied, and meant it. The months in San Francisco had given me time to adjust to having family, to understand the rhythms and expectations of belonging to something larger than myself. Now, splitting my time between Ruth's house and regular visits to Portland, I had found a balance that worked for everyone. Elena appeared at my elbow, carrying a plate of food. "You need to eat something," she said, falling into the easy sister role that had developed between us. "And Marcus wants to show you something." Marcus was standing near the garden, holding a manila envelope that looked familiar. "This came for you yesterday," he said, "but Elena wanted to wait until today to give it to you." The return address was from the attorney handling my mother's estate. Inside was a letter from my mother that I had never seen before, along with a small key. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that you have found Elena and that you are both building the family I should have helped you create years ago. I have one final secret to share with you, one final gift to give to both of my daughters." The letter explained that my mother had maintained a safety deposit box for 30 years, one that contained items she had saved for Elena but had never been able to give her. The key was to that box. "I kept everything," my mother's letter continued. "Every letter Elena sent that I returned unopened, every photo she included, every attempt she made to reach out to us. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from having to share you with someone else. I was wrong, and I hope that what I've saved will help you both understand the love that has always existed in our family, even when we couldn't see it." Elena read the letter over my shoulder, her eyes filling with tears. "She kept everything?" "Apparently," I said, looking at the bank address on the key. "Do you want to go see what's in there?" "Together?" Elena asked. "Together." The next morning, Elena and I drove to the bank where my mother had maintained her secret safety deposit box for 3 decades. The bank manager led us to a small room where we could examine the contents privately. The box was larger than I had expected, filled with organized folders that chronicled Elena's attempts to connect with our family over the years. But these weren't just copies. These were the original letters, photographs, and mementos that Elena had sent, all carefully preserved and organized chronologically. "She kept everything," Elena whispered, pulling out a Valentine's Day card she had sent when she was 8 years old. "I made this in school, thinking about the sister I didn't know. There were school photos from every year, artwork Elena had created and mailed to us, even pressed flowers from bouquets she had included in her letters. My mother had created a complete archive of Elena's childhood, documenting the daughter she had never allowed herself to know. At the bottom of the box was a thick envelope addressed to both Elena and me, in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a letter that was longer and more detailed than the one that had started this entire journey. "I need you both to understand," it began, "that every day I kept you apart was a day I regretted. I was young and scared when I married your father, Elena, and I was threatened by the intensity of his love for you. I thought that if I could make him forget his past, we could have a perfect future. But perfect families aren't built on forgetting. They're built on including everyone who belongs." The letter went on to explain my mother's growing understanding of what she had done, her regret over the years of separation she had caused, and her hope that Elena and I would be able to create the relationship she had prevented. "Elena," my mother wrote, "I have watched you from a distance for years, and I am in awe of the woman you have become. You turned your pain into purpose, your loss into a mission to help others. You are exactly the kind of person I would want my daughter to know, and I am sorry it took me so long to realize that." The letter concluded with my mother's final gift, the deed to a small cabin on a lake in Northern California that she had bought years earlier, but had never told me about. "This is for both of you," she wrote, "a place where you can bring your families, where you can create the memories I prevented you from making. I hope it will be a place where our family can finally be complete." Elena and I sat in the bank's small room, surrounded by the evidence of my mother's complex love and regret, and cried together for the woman who had made such difficult choices but had ultimately found a way to bring us together. "She did love me," Elena said finally. "In her own complicated way, she was trying to protect all of us." "She did," I agreed. "And she made sure we would find each other when the time was right." A year later, I was living full-time in Portland, having moved from San Francisco to be closer to Elena and her family. I had established my graphic design business in Portland and was working on a project that would have seemed impossible a year earlier, designing materials for the David Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund and the family preservation program that Elena now directed. The cabin our mother had left us had become our family's gathering place, where we spent holidays and vacations with the extended family that had welcomed me so warmly. Ruth had moved to Portland to be closer to all of us, and she had become the boys' beloved great-aunt, sharing stories about their grandfather and teaching them about their family history. Elena's promotion had allowed her to implement policies that prevented family separations like the one our family had experienced. She had become a nationally recognized expert on family preservation, speaking at conferences and consulting with other states on best practices. "It's ironic," she said one evening as we sat on the dock at the cabin, watching David and Daniel fish with Marcus. "All those years of being separated from family taught me how to keep other families together. Maybe that was the point," I suggested. "Maybe everything that happened was supposed to lead us here, to this moment, to this work." Elena nodded, leaning back in her chair. "I've stopped being angry about the lost time," she said. "I think about all the families I've helped because of what I learned from our separation. Our pain had purpose." As the sun set over the lake, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. A letter from my mother had revealed a secret family, but it had also revealed something more important, that love persists across time and distance. that family is stronger than the forces that try to divide it, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes from helping others avoid the pain you've experienced. My nephews ran up from the dock, soaking wet and laughing, with Marcus close behind them. Elena stood to gather towels, already shifting into the maternal role that came so naturally to her. "Aunt Sarah," David said, tugging on my arm, "will you tell us the story again about how you and Mom found each other?" "Which part?" I asked, pulling him onto my lap. "The part where you got the letter," Daniel said, settling in beside us. "Well," I began, as I had dozens of times before, "it all started with a letter from Grandma Margaret, a letter that told me about the sister I never knew I had." As I told the story once more, I realized that it wasn't really about secrets or loss anymore. It had become a story about love that endures, about family that persists, and about the courage it takes to choose connection over isolation. The letter my mother left me had revealed a secret family, but in finding Elena, I had discovered something more valuable than secrets. I had found home. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.